Eugene Carter had emptied Sunset Glen's trash bins for 25 years, but this morning, the stink wasn't coming from the garbage. The porch creaked softly beneath his boots as he settled into the same wicker chair he'd used since the early 90s. The Florida sun had just begun its slow ascent, already warming the handrails and causing the dew to vanish in bursts of steam. Eugene took a sip of his sweet tea, more ice than liquid now, and unfolded the newspaper, fingers blackened faintly by the ink. A cicada chirred loudly from somewhere in the oleander bush by the fence. Somewhere across the lawn, the stars and stripes from the 4th still hung from its nail, drooping in defeat after the weekend's fireworks. The quiet comfort of ritual washed over him. Years ago, his father told him to stay the course, keep things running quiet, and nobody will bother you. But lately, Sunset Glen didn't seem to follow the same rules it used to. The neighborhood had gotten shinier. New paint. New people. New problems. And apparently, a new sense of order, though Eugene couldn't say whose order it was anymore. He leaned forward to reach for the clipboard that sat on the porch table, checking the route schedule he and Sam had laid out for the day. But something stopped him. A square of paper, crisp, laminated, and aggressively taped, clung to his personal garbage bin at the edge of the driveway. Eugene squinted, then stood, his knees cracking, and walked the few steps toward it. Non-compliant container, HOA notice of violation, the notice blared in bold, blocky font. The language was stiffer than the heatwave rolling through the cul-de-sac. He pulled the notice off and held it at arm's length, reading it twice without reaction. Apparently, his bin didn't meet visual uniformity standards, due to its faded green color and retro metal handles. Eugene had cleaned and painted that bin himself just 3 years ago. "Sam's not gonna like this," he muttered. Later that morning, after the route was finished and the trash had been collected as usual, on time and without fanfare, Eugene made his way to the HOA's weekly gathering. It was unofficial, of course, just a group of committee members sitting beneath a white event tent set up at the community center entrance. Folding chairs, plastic name tags, an electric fan that whirred more in hope than in function. Debbie Kessler stood at the front in her usual pastel cardigan, a clipboard hugged to her chest like a badge. "Mr. Carter," she called as he approached. "We were just reviewing some of the recent infractions." He stopped at the edge of the circle and offered a courteous nod. "Then I must be in the right place." Debbie gestured to one of the sheets pinned to a corkboard beside her. It featured photos, close-ups of bins, lawns, and mailboxes. His bin was front and center. "This one has clearly aged beyond acceptable standards," she announced. "It disrupts the aesthetic consistency of our streetscape." A few heads nodded. Others stayed down. Eugene didn't speak. He simply looked at her, then at the photo. The bin had been his father's, restored, cleaned, oiled, and used every week like clockwork. But that history wasn't on the printout. There was no checkbox for heritage. After a polite goodbye, he walked back to his truck. That evening, Sam pulled into the driveway on his bike, sweat-soaked and sunburnt from the day's run. "You got tagged?" he asked, pointing to the empty spot where the notice had been taped. "I got cited," Eugene replied. Sam wrinkled his nose. "That's gotta be personal. You see that bin on Lincoln Drive? One wheel's busted, and it's duct-taped like Frankenstein." Eugene gave a soft chuckle but said nothing. He lifted the mailbox lid to retrieve the mail, a slim stack of envelopes, one of them thicker than the rest. White. Embossed. HOA logo dead center. He opened it slowly, eyes scanning the contents while the porch fan hummed overhead. Due to continued non-compliance with community sanitation visuals, the letter read, "A formal fine of $50,000 is hereby levied against homeowner Eugene Carter." His eyes paused there, tracing the zeros. A breeze carried the sharp smell of magnolia and warmed asphalt. The cicadas had quieted now, leaving room for a heavier silence. Eugene didn't curse, didn't grimace. He folded the letter, stood up, and walked into the house. The screen door clicked shut behind him. A moment later, he emerged in the garage. Past the rack of tools, beneath a canvas cover, sat a narrow metal cabinet, its lock rusted but familiar. He took a key from the ring in his pocket, one he hadn't used in years, and slid it into the lock. Inside was a folder, thick with contracts, signatures, county seals, and decades of carefully preserved terms. He lifted the folder, glances toward the street, and mutters, "Time to clean house." The HOA had its bylaws. Eugene Carter had something better, blue ink and a county seal. The morning after the letter, Eugene pulled into the gravel lot of Daisy's Corner Diner, the tires of his truck crunching over sunbaked stones. The sign above the door hung slightly crooked, a red cursive D flickering even in daylight. Inside, it smelled of maple syrup, bacon grease, and strong coffee, the sort of comforting permanence he wished Sunset Glens still had. He pushed open the door and nodded to Diane, the head waitress, who wore the same floral apron she'd worn for 2 decades. "Usual booth?" she asked, not waiting for a reply. Marvin Cole was already seated, nursing a black coffee, his reading glasses low on his nose, a manila folder open beside his saucer. The cracked vinyl booth groaned as Eugene slid in across from him. "You still order the pecan pie before noon?" Eugene teased, sliding the sanitation contract from his own leather binder. Marvin didn't smile, but there was a familiar light in his eye. "They don't serve pie. They serve legacy. 2 different things." They opened the folder together, and for the next few minutes, they went line by line: city permits, contractor license dates, service agreements, even the renewal notice stamped, filed with county clerk, 2009. Marvin nodded slowly as he read, his pen tapping in rhythm with the hum of the diner's aging refrigerator unit. "Still valid," he said at last. "They've got no binding power over you, Gene. You're not under their regulation. They assumed jurisdiction, but they never had it." Eugene gave a slow nod, his calloused hands folded on the table. "And if I pulled service?" "You're within your rights." "But," Marvin lifted a finger, "you'll want to issue formal notice, something written. Leave a paper trail, so if it ever ends up in mediation, the judge knows who followed the law." Diane arrived with 2 mugs of fresh coffee and a plate of pie à la mode. "Extra scoop for you," she said, setting it down in front of Eugene. "You look like you're planning a revolution." Eugene smiled faintly. "More of a reminder." "Same difference." She winked and walked off. Marvin scribbled notes on a diner napkin, the same way he used to draft briefs back when he and Eugene volunteered at the city's legal aid office. He paused only to sip coffee, and when Eugene asked about public ordinance codes, Marvin quoted section numbers from memory. An hour later, Sam stepped into the diner, still wearing his summer crew shirt with the logo, Carter and Son, slightly faded from wash. He waved as he approached, a rolled-up HOA newsletter in his hand. "You've got to see this," he said, sliding into the booth beside Eugene. He unfolded the newsletter and pointed to a section titled, "Trash Talk, Sunset Glens Sanitation Partnership." Below was a blurb that read, "Our exclusive contract with Carter and Son ensures HOA-regulated trash collection continues to meet community standards." Eugene read it twice. "They never signed a contract with us," he said. "Nope," Marvin confirmed. "That's not just overreach. That's misrepresentation." "And it went to every household," Sam added. "Saw it on Mavis's fridge this morning." Eugene's jaw set. He folded the newsletter neatly, pulled a blank sheet from his binder, and began drafting a response. The pen moved slowly, deliberately. He wrote, "To whom it may concern, recent communication from the HOA contains factual inaccuracies regarding Carter and Son's contractual standing." Marvin peered over and offered minor edits, crossing out misinformation and replacing it with misrepresentation. As Eugene signed the bottom, he asked, "Hand deliver?" Marvin nodded. "Make it official. 1 per board member." Sam leaned back in the booth. "They're not gonna like this." "They don't have to," Eugene replied. That afternoon, Eugene stood at the HOA office door, manila envelopes in hand. He knocked once, waited, then slipped them inside, each labeled clearly with a recipient's name. On the outside of the memo, in large, bold letters, he had typed, Incorrect information can be hazardous to your reputation. Monday dawned hot and bright, except the only thing rolling through Sunset Glen were flies and complaints. By 7:15 a.m., most of the bins along Maple Ridge Drive had started to swell. Lids wouldn't shut. Trash bags sagged over the sides like overcooked pastry. The Florida heat didn't wait for noon. It pressed in early, wrapping around the neighborhood like a thick wool blanket soaked in vinegar. The air reeked of fish bones, wet cardboard, and sun-baked leftovers. And still, no rumble of Eugene's truck, no mechanical lift, no morning wave from Sam. Behind tightly shut windows, the HOA boardroom stayed silent. Its blinds were drawn. Debbie Kessler was inside, pacing. From his porch, Eugene sat with a mug of black coffee in one hand and a small stack of printed notices in the other. Sam walked up the path, phone in his back pocket, trying not to wrinkle his nose as he passed the curb. "It's officially awful out here," he said. "Linda called me from 3 houses down just to say her recycling bin is buzzing." I think she meant literal buzzing. Eugene handed him half the stack. "You take the west side. I'll do east." Together, they set off. At each door, Eugene or Sam left a neatly folded notice, printed on letterhead that hadn't been used since Eugene's father passed. Effective immediately, Carter & Son Sanitation suspends service to Sunset Glen under Clause 7.1 of our standing agreement, citing violation of contractual respect and false attribution of partnership. Residents may contact the county for alternate arrangements. No need for drama. No bold text. Just ink and accountability. By midday, the murmurs started. Jerry, a middle-aged accountant with no patience for disorder, stood by his driveway waving the HOA newsletter like a distress flag. "I've got meat scraps fermenting in here," he shouted to anyone who passed. "Where's the backup plan?" Linda, who usually remained neutral in all matters HOA, stood near her overflowing bin with a pinched expression. "I thought we had a contract with them," she asked aloud. Mavis, in her floral blouse and wide-brimmed straw hat, didn't say much until the shouting began. Then she stepped onto her porch with surprising force in her voice. "Eugene never missed a pickup before you folks started meddling," she said, eyes fixed on the HOA committee member walking the sidewalk with a clipboard. "Not once." By late afternoon, someone had started a live stream. The video, titled #SunsetTrashStorm, captured overflowing bins, dogs barking at bags torn open by raccoons, and a poorly timed sprinkler system spraying a wall of garbage back onto a neatly trimmed hedge. The views ticked upward. Inside the HOA boardroom, Debbie pressed her fingers into her temples. She had ignored Marvin Cole's letter, dismissed Eugene's hand-delivered memo as posturing. But now the calls wouldn't stop. Residents were tagging her in videos, emailing screenshots, demanding answers. She finally emerged just after 5 p.m., stepping into the sticky heat, blazer still buttoned as if professionalism could mask panic. She made her way to Eugene's home, heels clacking against pavement softened by the sun. Trash bags lined her path like silent protesters. Eugene saw her coming before she reached the porch. He was already standing, folder in hand. "You can't just abandon the neighborhood like this," Debbie said. Her voice tried for authority but landed somewhere between desperation and disbelief. "This is civic sabotage." Without a word, Eugene opened the folder, pulled out a copy of the memo she'd ignored, and handed it to her. Several lines were highlighted in yellow. He said nothing. She scanned the page, cheeks reddening. The fine print was clearer now than it had been when she dismissed it. "This'll turn people against you," she hissed. "They deserve to decide for themselves," Eugene replied, calm as the creak of the porch swing behind him. Debbie didn't answer. She turned and walked down the path, her steps slower than when she arrived. Sam appeared from the garage, a screwdriver in hand and smudges of oil on his arm. He watched her retreat, then glanced at Eugene. "That smelled worse than the bins." "Eugene, and it's just getting started." The flies were louder than the HOA's excuses, and Sunset Glen was running out of patience. By Wednesday morning, the heat had turned the neighborhood into something close to a slow-cooking compost heap. The sun was relentless, and the trash had started to speak. Not with words, but with a presence, one that clung to every railing, drifted into upstairs bedrooms, and sank deep into the porch cushions. At the community lakefront parking lot, bags had been hauled from garages in quiet surrender. What had once been a scenic overlook for weekend picnics was now a pile of refuse, overripe fruit, broken boxes, sour milk jugs, all steaming beneath a clear blue sky. Seagulls circled overhead. Dogs barked at shadows. Inside the HOA meeting room, Debbie Kessler closed her laptop with a sharp snap. Around her, the board fanned themselves with folders and tried not to breathe too deeply. The windows remained shut. "We need a backup contractor," she said, her voice more brittle than firm. "Even if it's temporary." A man in a short-sleeved dress shirt glanced up. "Carter still holds the only licensed route for residential pickup in this district." "Then we'll file for emergency override," she insisted. "He can't hold this neighborhood hostage." Across town, Marvin Cole stood in his office in a pair of slippers, cordless phone tucked to his shoulder. "They can file what they want," he told Eugene. "But the contract's airtight. They didn't read it before, they can't rewrite it now." Eugene stood in his garage, not saying much. Just listening. On his workbench sat a weathered plank of cedar, and beside it, a paintbrush and a can of deep brown enamel. "Should I expect court papers?" he asked quietly. "Doubtful," Marvin replied. "They're not that bold. Yet." That evening, as the sun dropped low and turned everything gold and sticky, the residents of Sunset Glen gathered in the community playground. It wasn't a planned meeting. People just showed up. Folding chairs dragged out of garages. Paper fans waved in front of flushed faces. The jungle gym became a podium. The kids stayed inside. Jerry arrived first, armed with a clipboard and a half-finished petition. "We need an HOA-wide vote," he said. "Something binding. We can't just live in garbage." Linda hovered near the fence, unsure if she wanted to sit or speak. Her eyes kept shifting between the growing pile near the tennis courts and the rows of tired-looking neighbors nodding along. And then there was Mavis, in her wide straw hat, arriving last and walking slow but with intention. She didn't carry a sign or a form. Just a firm look in her eyes. Eugene came too, but he didn't speak. He didn't sit. He walked to the playground entrance, found the wooden post that used to hold the neighborhood lost and found sign, and mounted a fresh board. On it, in bold dark paint, were the words: "Service suspended due to breach of respect and terms. Apology required for restoration." No logo. No signature. Just the message. Tessa stood off to one side beneath a tree, notebook in hand. She didn't speak to anyone. But she watched everything: her mother's absence, the residents' murmurs, Eugene's quiet gesture. She wrote something down. Voices rose around her. "He's the only one who's ever shown up without asking for a vote," Mavis said suddenly, stepping to the front. "He didn't leave us in the trash, we left him there." A beat of silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then, as if Sunset Glen had finally exhaled, the crowd joined in. Across the lot, a teenager lifted a phone. The camera caught Mavis standing tall, the sign behind her, and neighbors clapping beneath the setting sun. He tagged it, #TrashJustice. And the post began to spread. For the first time in years, the community hall was full, and it wasn't bingo night. The air inside was thick, despite the ceiling fans spinning above like lazy propellers on an aging plane. The folding chairs were packed shoulder to shoulder, arranged in hasty rows that spilled past the fire code line taped along the linoleum. A few residents leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Others whispered over paper handouts printed in grayscale. Someone had torn down the HOA quarterly meeting banner and replaced it with a homemade sign, "Emergency Assembly," painted in red block letters on a bedsheet. Eugene sat near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He'd chosen a seat by the exit, as he always did. Sam stood nearby, camera slung across his chest, occasionally tapping his phone. Marvin was beside Eugene, legs crossed, a worn leather folder in his lap. Every so often, he flipped through the pages like a priest checking scripture. At the front stood Debbie Kessler. Hair pinned tighter than usual, blouse buttoned to the top, voice trembling just enough to betray the heat, or the fear. "We are a community of order," she said, resting her hands on the podium. "We built Sunset Glen on standards. On dignity. On shared values. What we are seeing today, this chaos, is not the result of structure, but the absence of it." Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Eugene. "Mr. Carter has elected to disrupt that order. He has chosen not to participate in resolution. Instead, he's weaponized garbage." There were murmurs. A few groans. Someone coughed. Linda glanced sideways at Jerry, who rolled his eyes. "Let's not forget," Debbie continued, "that trash collection is a service. And services are a privilege. Not a right." A sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Then a voice, clear, steady, young, rose from the second row. "With respect, that's not legally accurate." Heads turned. Tessa stood, notebook in hand, a red pen clipped to the front cover. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said gently, then turned to the crowd. "My name is Tessa Kessler. I'm a law student at Central State. I've reviewed the service charter and the Carter contract." Debbie's face blanched. "HOAs," Tessa continued, "do not govern utilities. They regulate property aesthetics, fences, mailbox colors, grass height. They can't assume authority over independently contracted municipal services. Not unless they've signed a mutual jurisdiction agreement, which..." She looked to Eugene. He nodded once. "They never did." The room shifted. Physically. People leaned forward. Someone whispered, "Well, I'll be." Tessa sat slowly, blinking hard but composed. Eugene stood next. No flourish. Just presence. He walked toward the front, each step quiet but firm. Marvin remained seated but held up a single page, unfolded from his folder. Eugene took it and turned to the room. "This," he said, voice calm, "is the original sanitation contract between Carter and Son and the County of Magnolia. Established in 1974. Renewed in 1996, 2009, and again 5 years ago. It is not overseen by the HOA. It was never revised. And per Clause 7.1, it can be suspended if the vendor faces misrepresentation or disrespect." He turned the page, holding it out so that even those in the back could see the highlighted section. Mavis leaned forward, squinting. Jerry snapped a picture on his phone. "Debbie claimed we were under their regulation," Eugene continued. "That wasn't true. But I didn't come here to argue. Just to correct the record." Marvin stood now, adding, "I reviewed this contract myself in '96, when I still practiced. And again last week. It holds. Legally and morally." Silence. Eugene looked to Debbie, not with scorn, but with a kind of weary disappointment. "You fined me $50,000 for a trash bin. How much will you pay for the silence of your neighbors?" There was no uproar. No gasp. Just silence, like the room itself had gone still to absorb it. Debbie blinked. Her hand twitched at the podium. And then, almost gently, she let the microphone fall from her fingers. It hit the stand with a muted thud. She turned without a word and walked down the side aisle. Mavis, sitting near the edge, reached out and gently touched Eugene's forearm as he passed. "Well said." Debbie hadn't knocked on Eugene's door in years. That morning, she did, without makeup, without control. The sun had barely lifted past the oak trees lining Sunset Glen when the first chirps of mockingbirds broke the stillness. The heat hadn't yet settled in, and the breeze still carried a hint of dew. It was the kind of Florida morning that felt like a second chance, if you got to it early enough. Sam stood at the side of the house, rinsing down the sanitation truck with a hose. The water caught the light and scattered rainbows over the dented side panel. He whistled tunelessly, half-focused, until he saw her. Jean, he called, voice tight. Eugene had been sitting on the porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. He stood slowly as Debbie stepped onto the path. No clipboard. No makeup. No rehearsed poise. Just a plain envelope clutched in both hands, and a hollow look behind her eyes. She stopped beneath the tree at the edge of his lawn. The shade gave her something to hold on to. I came to talk, she said. You're talking, Eugene replied, calm as ever. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she continued, voice catching slightly. I thought if I pushed hard enough, things would settle. People would fall back in line. They didn't. She looked down. They won't, will they? No. The porch creaked again as Eugene descended the steps. He didn't offer a seat. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. A message had come from Marvin at sunrise. I already spoke with Marvin, he said. Here's the offer. She didn't take it, just stared. You'll withdraw the $50,000 fine. Publicly, Eugene continued. You'll issue a written apology to the residents and to me, to be read at the next assembly. You'll step down as president. Effective immediately. Her lips parted like she might argue, but the sound never came. In return, Eugene said, Carter and Son Resumes Trash Collection. The HOA will sign a $1 a year lease for exclusive community service. Non-interference clause included. She took the paper now, hands trembling slightly. No one else has to see this, she murmured. We can resolve it quietly. Eugene's gaze didn't waver. You made it public, he said. You fix it public. A car door shut gently down the street. Birds chattered overhead. Sam had turned off the hose and stood watching with arms crossed, water still dripping from the nozzle. A few houses over, Tessa stood near the sidewalk, clutching a to-go cup and watching everything unfold from behind her sunglasses. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Debbie read the document twice. Once with anger, once with resignation. Then she reached into the envelope she carried and pulled out a pen. Her signature was small. When it was done, Eugene stepped toward the sanitation truck. He'd spent the better part of the previous evening repainting the wooden sign that used to say, out of service. Now, he lifted the new one, fitted the hooks, and stepped back. Service reinstated, in trust of the community. The message gleamed in the soft morning light. Tessa walked over, slowly, and stopped a few paces away. She didn't speak to Eugene directly. Just looked down, nodded once, and said softly, thank you. Sam watched her go, then turned back to Eugene, brow raised. Think they'll treat us better now? Eugene laughed out, doesn't matter. We just do what's right. The folding chairs at Sunset Glen Park had never held so much silence, or so many second thoughts. They were the same metal chairs used for pancake breakfasts, outdoor movie nights, and the ill-fated dog obedience class that turned into a comedy of leashes. But this morning, they creaked under the weight of something different, regret, maybe, or the long exhale of a neighborhood tired of being divided. The sun filtered gently through the live oaks that framed the park, casting dappled patterns across the grass. A soft breeze stirred fallen leaves and lifted the scent of iced tea and lemon bars from picnic tables lined with homemade offerings. Mavis had brought a peach cobbler. Jerry showed up with a Tupperware full of deviled eggs. Linda, surprisingly, brought banana bread and no opinions. Eugene sat near the edge of the gathering, beneath the largest oak, his straw hat tilted forward just enough to shade his eyes. Sam leaned against the sanitation truck parked nearby, arms folded, nodding occasionally to residents as they arrived. Children giggled on the swings in the distance, their voices punctuating the hush like wind chimes. At the front of the gathering, a small wooden podium had been borrowed from the library. Debbie Kessler stood behind it, hands clutching a folded piece of paper. Her blouse was simple, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She waited for the last of the murmurs to die down before she began to speak. "I wrote this last night," she said. "But I've been writing parts of it in my head for weeks." A long pause. "I want to apologize to Mr. Carter, and to the residents of Sunset Glen. I made decisions that prioritized control over community. I enforced rules without context, and I allowed power to become pride. I issued fines that were never about safety, only compliance. And I forgot what this neighborhood is supposed to be." No one clapped. But no one scoffed either. She continued. "I resign effective immediately as president of the HOA. I accept the terms of the community agreement we've signed. And I support the formation of a new council, one that listens before it legislates." As she stepped away from the podium, the silence remained, but it had softened. Like the moment after a storm when you first hear the birds again. On a portable monitor near the back, Marvin appeared via Zoom, square-jawed and steady-voiced as ever. "The HOA charter for Sunset Glen is hereby dissolved," he said. "In its place, we welcome a resident advisory circle, voluntary, non-binding, and rooted in shared trust." There were quiet nods. Mavis stood and walked to the front. Jerry joined her. And then, unexpectedly, Tessa stepped forward. Eugene rose from his chair, not with ceremony but with quiet resolve. He approached Debbie, who stood near the edge of the group now, eyes glossy but dry. From under his arm, Eugene pulled a small, leather-bound notebook. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the original Carter and Son contract. Neat handwriting filled the margins, his father's, his own, even a few corrections made by Marvin decades ago. "This belongs with the people now," he said. She looked up, surprised. Eugene turned to the crowd and spoke just once. It wasn't about garbage. It was about being seen. He walked back to his chair, where Mavis was already waiting with a paper plate and a slice of peach cobbler. A moment later, Tessa approached him. "I hope I can do better than her," she said, voice quiet but steady. Eugene mimiced coy, "Don't be better, just be fair." The fence behind Eugene's home stood taller now, not because it was new, but because it had meaning. Sunlight filtered gently through the oak branches, casting golden bars across the yard where the cedar boards leaned and even rose against the side of the house. The smell of freshly sanded wood mingled with the crisp scent of morning grass. A hammer tapped rhythmically, solid, unhurried, followed by the occasional shout of a child trying to steady a measuring tape or call for another nail. Eugene stood at the center of it all, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pencil tucked behind one ear. His hands guided the youngest of the kids, a boy named Eli, as they lined up a slat against the new frame. Sam hovered nearby, recounting the story of the Carter and Son truck's first route through Magnolia County. "I swear, it barely ran. Mr. Carter's dad had to jump-start it every third house. Whole thing sounded like a cow with a cold." The kids laughed, a few mimicking engine noises while others grabbed sandpaper and nails. One girl traced her name into the dust on a board before brushing it away with a smile. By the shed, Mr. Tomlinson slowly approached with a plank in hand. Age had curved his back, but his grip was steady. Without a word, he held up the board. The inscription had been burned into the grain with a soldering iron. "Built by my father. Defended by his son. Shared by all." Eugene stepped aside as the old man mounted it to the center post. The hammer stroke was ceremonial, once, clean, final. Across the yard, Tessa arrived carrying a small basket draped in a linen cloth. She waited until the children drifted toward the lemonade pitcher, then walked over and handed Eugene a folded card. Inside, written in neat handwriting, was a single line. "Thank you, for teaching by example." He looked up. She didn't speak further, just nodded and stepped back, watching the scene with the quiet presence of someone who had learned how to listen. The morning pressed on, filled with the rhythm of building. Sam showed two boys how to brace a corner beam, while a pair of girls debated what color to paint their birdhouses. Someone turned on a radio low in the background, oldies crackling through the static like a whisper from decades past. Eventually, one of the children approached Eugene, small hands smudged with sawdust and a bright blue pencil behind his ear. "Mr. Carter, can we paint our own fences now?" Eugene gat down, "Only if you promise to get them dirty first." Laughter broke out again, light, honest, unguarded. Later, as the day mellowed and the kids ran off to play under the sprinklers, Eugene and Mavis sat in the shade of the old oak tree. She passed him a cold glass of sweet tea and pulled out a paper fan from her purse. The new fence gleamed just a few yards away, sturdy and imperfect in all the right ways. "That fence might outlive all of us," she said, fanning herself gently. Eugene dapped, "Then let's build one worth remembering." On a quiet street where cedar fences now stand a little taller, Sunset Glen found something stronger than HOA rules: each other. What began as a standoff over garbage became a reminder that dignity can't be legislated, and silence in the face of injustice serves no one. When power is used to punish instead of protect, communities fracture. But when neighbors stand together, even the most rigid structures must bend. Maybe, just maybe, the measure of a good neighborhood isn't its perfect lawns, but how it listens when someone says, "Enough."